So this is a video explaining to you three different concepts related to language teaching as proposed by Rodgers and Rodgers 2001. My idea with this video is to present the definitions and the information they provide by asking you questions in order to help you understand what your approach, your method, or your methodology is. First, we have approach. As proposed by the authors, it is the theory of the nature of language and the theory of the nature of language learning. This is to say, what is language for you? What are the basic units of the language for you? Is the language unit for you only vocabulary or only expressions or just the grammar? Or is language for you an interactional system that allows social negotiation of meaning? And the next part is the theory of the nature of language learning. Basically, what are the cognitive and the psycholinguistic processes, the individual processes in order to learn a language? Are they repetition, exposure? Are they the perception of comprehensible input and comprehensible intake? And this is also the account of the conditions that allow successful use of these processes. So what are the conditions that facilitate language learning? Repetition. Are they sitting in a circle in a room? Are they being exposed to specific environmental conditions like being outside in the nature or listening to a specific kind of stimuli that facilitate certain type of processes like memorization or attention and retention of material? If you answer to these questions, you would be able to identify your approach. Remember and consider that approach has then three different views. The first view is a structural view in which grammar and the structures of the language are very, very important, which then determines the way that you are going to come into your method and then come into your methodology in the future. The second view is functional, where you are more interested about the meaning that language is conveying. And the third view is about interactional. Interactional considering aspects of socialization, meaning, and it connects very much to the idea of being able to make yourself understood and understand what other people say, regardless of how well or structured aspects are. In general, these three approaches or views of the approach of language include the possibility of incorporating elements of grammar, because one view of the approach doesn't necessarily mean that you are not considering grammar. For example, right now we have English as a lingua franca, and the fact that we are considering students' intelligibility doesn't mean that we are not involving the linguistic competence or the necessity to have strong, solid grammar foundations. So these three views then determine the way that you proceed in a class. They are not a combination. Your approach is not a combination of three views. You usually have one view. How are these approaches then? How are all these theoretical elements happening in your class? The realization happens in a method. As we discussed, the method are a response to what is socioculturally happening in the moment of in which the method is proposed, but also considering the conditions, considering the way people learn, and considering the units of language. In this sense, a method is a strict, rigid, and fixed set of parameters that explain to you how to work with the language and how to develop a class. If one of the elements is broken, if one of the elements is not followed precisely as it is proposed by the method, then it's not the method anymore. It is a variation of it. A method then includes a general and specific objectives of the method. So yes, developing language learning by including specific learning conditions and by including specific processes of exposing students to the language. It includes the syllabus model, so it usually tells you exactly how to organize the linguistic information presented in the course that you are teaching or in the classes that you're teaching in the process you're carrying out with the students. It discusses what are the types of learning activities and teaching activities. So it includes also then very specific information on their roles. What are the tasks that you are giving to the students? What are the control types or the type of elements that you're giving to the students in order to control the interaction, the materials or not? What are the roles of the learner in terms of the work they do with their peers or even with the teacher? And then it gives you specific instructions on what the teacher should be doing. What are the functions of the teacher in terms of organization, in terms of delivery of the class, and in terms of feedback and evaluation, and the role of the teachers in determining the content that they are presenting to the class. The role of instructional materials, how these materials affect how students manipulate the materials, how the materials connect to the type of exposure that you are having with the students, and what these materials seem to indicate in terms of interaction and in terms of language skill development. Methods then are varied in the objectives they have. Some of them seek to develop language competencies by movement, others by imitation, others by replication of natural processes of language acquisition, others seek to develop these competencies by having students manipulate the materials in a specific kind of way, or having the teacher develop specific learning conditions like the room, the music, and the type of oral interaction or interaction with peers they have. Since methods are so strict, usually what happens is that developing really facilitates language learning, and this language learning happens because it strengthens the view of the language that we have as an approach, and it helps students be systematic about the work that is being done, about the language competences being developed and proposed activities by the teacher. However, in the evolution of the traditional methods or popular methods of the previous century, we'll see that then we cannot be always fixed to the certain type of conditions for learning, for example, because they are moving and they are changing. So what happens then is that teachers, in their own understanding of what a method is, when they start developing and carrying out the method, they include or incorporate new ideas. They take a stand, they take a position, and they become critical, autonomous, pedagogical entities that are able to propose changes to the rules that they are being given. In that sense, methodology appears. The authors do not propose the word methodology, but they propose the word procedure. Yes, basically, what are the classroom techniques, the teaching practice, and the behaviors that are observed when the methods are used? Turns out then that teachers usually do not have a clear specific method. They just have a set of elements of activities, interactional patterns, tactics, strategies, and resources that they use in class that are not specifically attached to a method as a strict form, but rather this methodology is very connected to the approach they have. Basically, the resources, the interactional patterns, and the tactics that are happening in class, the development of the class is connected to what the teachers believe language is, if it is structural, functional, or interactional, and this methodology is observable in a class when teachers propose specific conditions for language learning and understand how students process and the cognitive elements that the students have in order to process the language. In that sense, we would say that teachers usually have different methodologies that are connected to specific approaches, but not necessarily to specific methods. In that order of ideas, the big question that I have for you as a reflection is, do you have clear what your approach is? What is your method? Do you have a method? And what are the elements that characterize your methodology? So right now, please take a moment to discuss with your partners these questions. What is your approach? Do you have a method, a specific method that you follow? And what are the characteristics of your methodology?